So basically, Charles Darwin, when he was, growing up, he loved insects and plants, and he loved observing that stuff in nature. And I don't really know, I forgot who the sailor was, but basically, he goes on this voyage. It's called like the Voyage of the Beagle. I think that's a ship name, the Beagle. And he goes. They need a chart. I'm guessing like maybe chart like some territory in the south in like South America, some of those coastal areas. I think that's their objective. But over there, Charles Darwin does a lot of observing, and he observes the nature and the plants and the animals, and he gets a lot of observations out of it that developed in him a new way of thinking that biologists now use all the time. Or, central part of biology is the idea of natural selection. So, Charles Darwin, one thing he noticed was that all the life, right, in the very various islands. I think it's the Galapagos. Am I saying that right? I think I might not even be saying like the word correctly, but he notices that many of the birds, I don't know, not just birds, all the life, right, is different from the wildlife in Britain, where he's from, in England. And he notices that, hey, the cactus eating finch, right, has a really sharp and long beak, right? The finch that eats a lot of seeds has a really large beak, and the finch that has a really small narrow beak eats a lot of insects. So he notices that, hey, their beaks kind of match what they're eating. The big beak, it's really helpful for smashing seeds to eat them, right? The narrow, small little beak can help grab insects, kind of like tweezers. And the sharp, long beak is really helpful for cactus, right? So he notices that all these birds have characteristics that help them get food and get around, and it helps them in their environment. And he calls these adaptations, or I don't know if he calls them like that word, adaptation, but this is one of your vocab words. An adaptation is any kind of inherited trait that helps with survival and reproduction, right? That last part's key. People kind of forget that, right? But reproduction, Darwin believed, was really necessary, right? Not only do the animals need to survive, they also need to reproduce, because these traits are inherited. They get passed down. So, what he kind of noticed, he really had a couple of observations. Throughout the whole trip, he probably wrote stuff down, and he came out with a few observations. The first observation, the notes really has 4, so I'll go based off the notes. His observation, right? So observations, right? Is that one, there's a lot of variety, right? So species have variation. So if you think about, this is, I guess, this isn't really the finch species. That's more, I guess maybe that'd be more of like a genus. I think that's what it's called, which we'll talk about maybe in the next section. But even if you look at the insect-eating species, there's still variation. The beaks are slightly different. The colors could be different. There's variation. They don't all look the same. There's a lot of variation. And I'm gonna look at the notes just so I can make sure. Okay, yeah, this is the second one. This is kind of the second thing. But these variations get passed down, right? So think about, most easiest way to think about it is just think about humans, right? We have certain eye colors, hair types, hair, color, hair, skin color. That gets passed down to to our kids, right? Usually, if you have curly hair, chances are your parents have curly hair, and obviously that's not always, sometimes you could have two kids or two parents with brown hair, and then they give birth to a blonde kid, right? So, it's not as simple, it's complex, but the basic idea is that variation does get passed down, right? Third observation is, hey, species reproduce. Is this the third one? This might be. Okay, yeah. Species overproduce, right? So, the deal is if you think about a frog, it'll probably lay thousands of eggs, right? Animals will just tend to overproduce and make a lot of, offspring. And the reason is kind of for number 4. Not all offspring survive. Right? So if you have a bunch of offspring, they're not all gonna make it, right? There's not enough, resources first and foremost, right? If you think about the area where a frog has just laid a bunch of eggs and they're all on tadpoles now. There's so many tadpoles and there's just not enough food or resources or whatever the tadpoles need to survive. There's not going to be enough for those, all the offspring. That's just the definition of overproduce, right? If they produce just the right amount, then there would be just the right amount for, I guess, them all to survive. But there's also predators, and there's also, nature is just cruel, right? So they overproduce in the hope that, at least out of the thousands of eggs that I may lay, at least 10 of them might go on and survive. So from these observations, he basically made a couple of inferences. So the first inference, now I don't remember. I'll look at the notes real quick just to look at which, the order of how about I want to go to this. The order about which I want to go at this, I guess. So the first kind of inference is this idea that these people with these adaptations, right, these inherited adaptations, they're going to be more likely to survive and reproduce, right? Adaptations help survive and reproduce. And the second kind of inference from all of this is, okay, well, this is kind of, I guess, the main, what I just did, this is the main kind of inference. Really, adaptations will cause kind of animals, or individuals, I guess, or I don't know. Yeah, individuals, because I think this probably applies to plants. The adaptations will cause individuals to will overproduce or just reproduce in general. And the inherited traits help the offspring survive. And hey, when those offspring survive, guess what's going to happen? They're going to grow up and they're going to reproduce. And those traits keep getting passed down. Now the question becomes, okay, well, where does an adaptation begin, right? Because, these finches, Darwin kind of realizes, hey, they're really different from the finches in England, right? The truth is the finches in England and the finches in South America, they came from kind of a common ancestry, like a common ancestral finch, right? Probably not like a finch as we know it today, but they have a lot of similarities between them, right? But what happens is mutation. So we're going to talk about mutations more and kind of the cause of these changes and variations. But basically, you got to understand that mutations are random, right? I'm learning AP biology, and I don't remember too much from when I took biology accelerated, but the idea is that when there's a mutation, your body tends to self-regulate, I guess. It's like, it's kind of like autocorrect. And biology teachers, please scream at me in the comments if I'm wrong. But if there's a mutation, your body kind of works to prevent it from not happening, right? But sometimes these mutations can slip and you'll get a mutation. And sometimes the mutation is really slight, right? It's a really slight mutation, right? If I give birth to a kid and my kid, not me, obviously, if I have a kid and the kid maybe has like a slightly lighter shade of hair than me, right? That is a very slight mutation, right? So these these beaks, right, to evolve. Let's say maybe the finches in England, or maybe the common kind of ancestral, the common ancestor had a beak more like this, right, more like this one. It took a lot of generations, right? Birth, generation after generation after generation, more and more reproducing. The ones in the environment, right? The ones in the environment with seed as their primary source of food, those, eventually a mutation occurred that made the beak look more like this. And that bird, and maybe kind of its siblings or whatever, they were able to eat more, and they were able to survive, and they were able to reproduce, and then their kid had a similar kind of beak, right? So generation after generation, you're seeing more and more variations that are, causing it to look closer and closer to a beak like this, but it happens over a long, long time. So, right? Because, it's not like, imagine you had a population where it's like 50% finches with these beaks and 50% with finches, or 50% of the finches have these kind of beaks, right? It's not like, let's say they eat seed, right? It's not like these can't have seed. It's more likely that these ones are going to be able to survive, reproduce, while finches with these kind of beaks are less likely to survive and reproduce because they don't have enough food, right? And the environment matters, right? So that's why there's variation among the world. Different environments lead to different adaptations. But you can't think that an environment necessarily causes adaptations, right? People might think, oh, the world's getting hotter. There's more carbon dioxide. But the wildlife, they'll adapt, right? They'll adapt. Well, it's not the environment that causes adaptations. It's mutations. Did I say yeah, mutations cause adaptations, right? So if you think about, if you imagine an environment of like sea otters, right, in the ocean, and then you start increasing, let's say, the acidity of the ocean water. And by the way, I have no idea if this actually would affect the sea otters, but let's say the increase in carbon dioxide emission is causing an increase in acidity. Once again, I have no idea if that's actually correlated. Maybe this is a really bad way to teach us. My point is it's not like the sea otters are going to magically adapt and, be able to survive, right? Many sea otters are going to die if acidity kills them, right? What may happen is that after a couple of generations, right, one sea otter is more resistant to acidity. And then it's going to be able to survive better than those that don't have that sort of mutation. And it's going to be able to reproduce and pass that down. Over maybe thousands of years, they become more resilient to the acidity. But that's only because of that random mutation. Had that mutation never happened, maybe all the sea otters will die, right? Maybe the sea otters die so quickly, there's not enough time for a mutation. That's what you need to consider, right? So it's not the environment that causes adaptations. The adaptations fit the environment, if that kind of makes sense. At least they tend to. So this is the idea of natural selection. It's this process of adaptations occur, or mutations occur, and people with a mutation better suited for their environment will be better able to survive and reproduce, and then those adaptations will get passed down, right? The variations get passed down. The variations that help the most with survival and reproduction, right, will just keep continuing to get passed down. Individuals never evolve. It's just the population. The population as a whole, right? The population of finches in the Galapagos that were maybe eating seeds, right, went from just a regular old finch, maybe, right, the common ancestor, and it eventually it gave way to these three different species. And I think they are three different species. I want to make sure I'm getting that terminology right. These are different species. So that's just what you gotta, it's natural selection, right? Hopefully this made sense. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.